I don't think you realize how happy it makes me to talk about two of my favorite passions within the same video: business and video games. No, I didn't become a game reviewer or a game streamer in any way, but I've been on a Dark Souls tear recently, and I've come to realize how underappreciated the game industry has been as a business and as an art. So I thought I would look into the video game industry, see how much more interest it got now that it's more profitable, and how the pandemic actually made it even more so. This is the business of video games. The video game industry started out in the form of arcade games. Most older generations remember seeing a Pac-Man machine or a pole position game. I'm not particularly old, but I remember seeing these things around. Video games became more commercially available with home consoles that you can actually play within your living room. The Magnavox Odyssey was probably the first commercial success. Over the 70s and 80s, we would see these little boom and bust periods with home consoles. Over this period, often known as the golden age of video games, we had some really successful consoles like the Commodore 64 and the Atari 2600. Even today, trying to recapture that golden age, people are still nostalgic for those consoles, and you'll probably see them for quite a higher price point on eBay. The 90s saw a time when game companies were really breaking new grounds with these complex 3D worlds and these really intricate storylines that could be interpreted in different ways, and it was the first foray into the industry actually being considered as an art form. PC gaming was virtually mastered, but at-home console games were really catching their stride, so the two major competitors, I would argue, at the time were PlayStation and Nintendo, which were neck and neck trying to create the best cutting-edge games to try to capture the audience and really become the leaders of their industry. Personally, I grew up with the PlayStation. I'm very nostalgic for games like Spyro and Crash Bandicoot, but I would go to a few buddies' houses and we would play Smash Brothers and Legend of Zelda. Video games were a great childhood bonding experience that went well beyond just watching a movie or watching a show. You would actually sit there with your buddies, see a very difficult level or a very complex boss, and you'd start to strategize and throw your opinions in the mix and try to come up with a solution to this challenge altogether. The early 2000s set the industry in stone, so you were either on Team PlayStation, Team Xbox, Team Nintendo, or you were a part of the Steam team on the PC platform. Or if you were a particularly lucky kid, you somehow owned all the consoles. As the industry carved out its own path, it actually took a while for it to really earn the respect it deserved from the broader masses. Many people blamed it for violence and mass shootings, or since it appealed to a younger demographic, or they at least considered it to be a younger person's activity, never mind the amount of games out there that appeal to a decidedly older audience. It took a very long time before it was actually considered an art form by many. It still blows my mind that people hold either of these views even today, so I actually think gamers are some of the most empathetic people I've ever met. Most want to play as the good guy, leaning towards a morally good and heroic ending rather than play as a bad guy with a psychopathic ending, even in these arguably consequence-free environments. Anytime I look at a YouTube walkthrough that's either looking towards the best possible ending or the worst possible ending, I find that more people lean towards the best possible ending just to create that good guy ending, and there's less attraction to actually being a bad guy, even when they're kind of breaking reality here and they can do whatever they want. They still want to be the good guy. That's also one of the only forms of storytelling where you have to earn your next chapter. You can't just read along or sit there passively and watch it. You have to interact with this medium and just get to the next point of the story. The look and feel of a game, if done well, can be pretty much screen grabbed and hung up on your wall as any other piece of art. And the acting, either whether it's voice acting or motion capture acting, can put a lot of mediocre Hollywood actors to shame. It's an industry that pretty much has anything for anybody, whether it's sports games, racing games, adventure games, first-person shooters, puzzle games, brain teaser. Like it's got something for everyone. All these features were working in tandem to create the $120 billion industry we know of today. And to put that into perspective, this industry utterly dwarfed the US film and music industry in 2016. So how did it become such a titan today? And despite all of the challenges hurled at it, how did it manage to succeed? We'll find that out in the next level. First thing you have to know about video games is that they have multiple revenue sources, whether you buy the base game, the downloadable content, or the in-game purchases like seasons passes, or if you buy a game on a subscription basis like with World of Warcraft. If it's a mobile game, you can also get some ad revenue. And these base games, they're not cheap. If you are buying a AAA title like Red Dead Redemption or Sekiro, then you can easily run between $60 to $80, which kind of sounds like a lot on the face of it, but when you consider the amount of hours of gameplay and entertainment that you get out of it, not only for the first run through, but a lot of people like to play it multiple times, and you really start to get some bang for your buck. And the reason why these AAA titles cost so much is because they cost so much to make. These games usually include really large development teams, and the budgets can vary wildly from $40 million to as much as $250 million in development costs as well as marketing costs. This seems like a very daunting investment, but you as a video game investor or CEO can make a huge return if everything's done well. And you don't have to be a big, giant game developer either. You can be an indie game developer that creates a pretty great game on a smaller budget and have that same game featured on a platform like Steam where it's pretty much featured alongside these AAA titles. If you want to compare that to the film industry, it'd be kind of like if you filmed a home video and then it was featured in a theater alongside the next Marvel movie. More recently, investors have taken interest in the gaming industry less because of its traditional model and more because of a prominent emerging market, the esports industry. Esports has been filling stadiums across the world with these exceptional players playing games like League of Legends, Fortnite, Overwatch, Dota, you name it, just anything competitive. And these tournaments basically follow the same structure and principle as your traditional sports games, and they get a lot of views and make a lot of money. Esports has a huge following that just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Last year, the League of Legends tournament actually got more viewers than Super Bowl, which is crazy. According to Forbes, global esports revenues exceeded $1 billion and had audience sizes of well over 433 million. Late last year, I spoke with the Amuka esports team, and they were very confident that esports would grow a lot larger than right now it's predominantly featured in Asian markets, but they definitely see it as becoming this large global phenomenon that can easily surpass traditional sports markets. They were also very confident that it would take off in colder weather countries like Canada and Scandinavian countries. Makes sense, we don't want to go outside, it's chilly. And with a company like Amuka Esports, they are on track to developing these gaming hubs across major cities in North America. So I actually had the chance to tour one of these, and it was pretty much a full-fledged arcade studio on steroids. It was a giant warehouse of just computer games, and they were just probably the strongest PCs I've ever seen. It's all very big and it's all very impressive, and all of these companies are setting their sights to greater heights. But what does a global downturn do to an industry like this? The COVID-19 global pandemic has left businesses closing, laying off staff, and asking for bailouts. And it almost seemed like just about every industry was impacted. The only industry I can think of offhand besides entertainment industries like streaming, for example, is the gaming industry. And come to think of it, this makes sense. Global lockdowns to curb the effects of the pandemic kept people indoors, so gamers just sort of shrugged, booted up their consoles, and got to gaming. And gaming companies were very quick to encourage this socially distancing behavior with deep discounts on games or free trials. Seriously, my Steam wish list is just... my inbox is filled with all these notifications about this game being on sale or that game being on sale. I'm sure everybody's kind of experiencing the same thing. And it's not just about having more time on their hands or these deep discounts. For a lot of gamers, these online matches mean that they can actually connect with their friends and talk to them over headsets, and it's a great way to reach out and just connect with people. More time spent on playing games meant more game sales, more subscriptions, more ad exposures, and for non-gamers, it might have even meant that they took up a new hobby. However, the ban of mass gatherings works as a double-edged sword for the gaming industry. As we mentioned before, esports used to fill up these stadiums, so like any other sports industry, these events had to either be postponed or canceled outright. So that's a lot of lost revenue, and people who worked in the more physical aspects of this job, or in this industry. So if they're a stagehand or a producer or something of the like, then they were losing out on wages. That said, there's still a lot of streaming infrastructure out there, so they could probably remotely play these games and still provide entertainment for an audience. And this kind of sport would present less contact than your traditional sport, so they're probably more well-positioned to operate under these circumstances than, say, football or baseball. Of course, COVID-19 can also interrupt new game development and distribution, which can really negatively impact sales. Since a lot of people in the industry are working remotely, there could be an argument that this might stall some productivity, though a lot of studies say that working remotely actually has the same level of productivity, but when you work in a team environment and everybody needs to see the same concept art, the same 3D models, it can require a stronger remote working capacity, and maybe it starts to get a little bit bogged down in the details there. Game companies have warned that a prolonged economic shutdown would begin to have a negative impact on the gaming industry. Another sort of ambiguous impact that the COVID-19 crisis would have on the industry is that this pandemic caused a recession. Recessions usually mean that people have less disposable income to spend on discretionary goods like video games. So if faced with a decision of either filling up your refrigerator or getting the next Elder Scrolls game, hopefully you'll fill up your refrigerator. That said, on the other side of the recession argument, people are looking for less expensive ways to get entertainment value and spend their time. Little known fact, this is how the board game Monopoly actually got its grounds. So back during the Great Depression, people had less money and were looking for the most amount of hours to take up their time with the least amount of cost. With a board game like Monopoly that takes hours to complete and has one fixed price, it very quickly became just this very North American pastime. Why anybody would spend that much amount of time playing that game nowadays is anybody's guess, but I just stick with my video games. As we mentioned before, AAA titles are far from being cheap, but nothing's stopping you from going to buy an older game, which you can still get that same nostalgic value out of, or even if you haven't played the game before, it's still a great game all these years later. One of the games I spent the most amount of time on was the fourth Elder Scrolls game, Oblivion. It generally takes people about 200 hours to complete that game. It probably took me longer because I like to take my time actually exploring different places and getting all the quest lines done and just experiencing every aspect of that game that it offered. But let's take the base amount of time, or the average amount of time of 200 hours, and the base cost of $20, and that's pretty much 10 cents an hour you're spending for that experience. Now in my case, with Oblivion, I got that game for about $5. I bought it off a buddy, and I definitely spent more than 200 hours on it. So if you really go factoring in how much it actually cost per hour of enjoyment, I think you're looking at like a fraction of a cent there. Long story short, I do believe video games can be the new Monopoly-esque form of cheaper entertainment during a recession. A short-term pandemic has been beneficial to the industry, but a longer-term pandemic will obviously create a more negative outlook for the sector. And if you were never a gamer before, maybe a lockdown is a good place to start. Thanks for watching this video. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and if you've been playing games during this pandemic, then how about you drop some recommendations in the comments? I'm always looking for something new to try out. Oh, and finally, don't forget to check out StephanieHughesJournalism.com. And as always, this has been Stephanie Hughes signing off.